I'm Massimo Bottura.
This is Amanda Cohen.
This is David Kinch.
This is Mike Anthony.
This is Hooni Kim.
This is Amanda Freitag.
This is Richard Blaze.
This is Paul Kahn.
This is Curtis Stone.
This is Stephen Harris.
This is Missy Robbins.
And you're listening to Andrew Talks to Chefs.
I went to a vocational school for high school. And so my freshman year of high school, we had to make a choice of, what career do you want? What vocation are you choosing? So I had chosen plumbing because they had told us that plumbers start at work at $35,000 a year. And that was $5,000 a year more than every other trade or vocation that they had spoken to us about.
I mean, there was a period of time where every time I went on Instagram, you guys were like the Avengers, like you all had your own businesses, but you would all like come together.
I am a big believer in the individual, right? Like you got to be true to yourself. If something is inspiring you and pushing you forward and something is in your thoughts or in your heart, I think you have a responsibility as a human being to pursue that. I really do believe that. And granted, I have read The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand 20 times in my life because that individualism and kind of objective thinking has been really important to me.
That, of course, is Chef Scott Conant, who is today making his long-delayed debut on Andrew Talks to Chefs, and that is coming right up.
The presenting sponsor of Andrew Talks to Chefs is Mies. Mies is the chef-created recipe operating system that makes your professional kitchen life easier with unprecedented tools for recording, scaling, analyzing, costing, and teaching recipes, much of it at the press of a virtual button. Learn more at getmeez.com/Andrew. That's GETMEEZ.com/Andrew. This episode of Andrew Talks to Chefs is supported in part by S.Pellegrino Sparkling Natural Mineral Water. For the past 125 years, S.Pellegrino has supported the art of fine dining in all of its ever-changing forms and nurtured the next generation of chefs through resources and mentorship. To learn more, visit sanpellegrino.com.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. This is Andrew Talks to Chefs. I am your host, Andrew Friedman, and our guest today is Scott Conant. Scott is someone I'm sure all of you out there are familiar with. I will mention before properly introducing him that this will be an introduction on the shorter side. Number one, because I seem to have some sniffles tonight. I'm going to try to get through this before they come back. And also, I'm getting up very early in the morning. I'm recording this on Monday night, and Tuesday morning, I am flying down to Miami to attend the Lengua Conference for the second time. It is not the second edition of the Lengua Conference. It's actually been going on longer than that, but I was there for the first time last year, and I'm returning there in the morning, so this will be on the short side. Our guest, as I say, is Scott Conant. I'm sure he is familiar to all of you, possibly from his restaurants like Scarpetta and L'Impero years ago in New York City. He's got a handful of restaurants right now, including one in Atlanta called The Americano, which is where he spoke to us from for this remote conversation. And this conversation, I should say, was remote. That is supposed to be unusual for us, although we've done it a few times since switching to video, mainly because we promised ourselves we will not miss a Tuesday airing ever. Scott and I were supposed to talk. We had a bit of a situation in the extended Andrew Talks to Chefs family. Everyone is fine, but it did cost us a recording week, and we had promised Scott a date, and more importantly, he had promised one to us. I've been trying to get Scott on the show forever, so we ended up doing it remotely. I don't think it suffers at all. In fact, I think it's an outstanding conversation. It runs a little over an hour. I would encourage you to stay with it all the way through, especially if you are in the industry, and especially if you are a young person in the industry. Scott and I go way back. We have known each other. Well, we get into it in the interview. I don't need to say it here. We've been friends for a very long time. For whatever reason, I haven't been able to get him on the show. Part of that was due to the pandemic. Part of it is due to the fact that New York City is no longer his primary home, and we do like to do these interviews in person. Although if I'd known we were going to end up doing it remotely, I would have done this 5 years ago. But here we are. So Scott, of course, is on TV's Chopped. He also has a line of pasta sauces out that we talk about in great detail in the conversation. And I do link to where you can find more information about those sauces in the show notes for today's show. And of course, Scott has been involved, as I just said a minute ago, with a number of restaurants. This is a conversation that is definitely substantive. It gets into how he started cooking, the evolution of his style, all the sorts of things we usually get into here. But because we have such a comfort level with each other, we also kicked around everything from a fountainhead to how celebrity chef culture has changed in the last several decades, to some notes about Bobby Flay. It's all over the place, but I think it's very entertaining. I hope that you will have the impression I did looking back on it as I was editing, which is that you were listening or sitting in on two old friends just having a rap session. And I'm going to get right to it before I have to sniffle again, and so I can catch some sleep for my flight. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to my conversation with Scott Conant. Here you go.
It's gonna take a prolonged arrangement of the senses to make some sense of this.
All right, Scott Conant, I'm so happy to have you here on the show. You and I, thank God you have a team, because you and I have flirted with you doing this show. We were talking about it actually in early 2020, right before the plague hit.
The whole.
So I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Great to see you as always.
Same here.
We bump into each other at events and luncheons and things of that nature, and we always talk about getting together for coffee or lunch or dinner or doing your podcast or whatever the case may be. But here we are. So
yeah, I'm thrilled to have you here. So here's how I want to start, because I don't even know if you remember the first time we ever met. But it was a Saturday night. It was at least 22 years ago, at least, because it was before I was married. And it was before we had kids.
Yeah.
It's actually more than 25 years ago. That's mind blowing.
Yes.
It was a Saturday night, and I, at the last second, decided I wanted to actually go out. My now wife, Caitlin, and I were going to just chill on the Upper West Side at our apartment. And I called the late Ed Schoenfeld, who people probably know from Red Farm, but who had a long, long history as a restaurateur and consultant before that. And I said, Eddie, it's the last second. Who are you working with? I'm going to go check him out. And he said, there's this unbelievable chef. You're not going to believe the setting, but I'm telling you, there's this guy named Scott Conant, and he is at a place called City Eatery on the Bowery.
It was 1999.
So I went down there. Now,
Yeah.
This restaurant was basically, well, why don't you describe it? I've already talked too much. You're the guest. What was that restaurant? Because it was half a club.
It was a club downstairs called Astor Lounge. And then upstairs, we had turned this French bistro into, I mean, you talk about, I think our budget was spit and hope. We didn't even have dollars attached to it, right? Like, it was, which, speaks to a lot of my life, by the way. We could take that down the road. And somehow we made a successful, a little restaurant out of this space. It was a sprawling space, super high ceilings, large mirrors on the window. It was a French bistro that we decided to turn into an Italian restaurant. And it worked for the most part. We had no budget. Eddie placed me into Ed Schoenfeld placed me in the space. The owners were this three Turkish people, a man and two women, who again didn't have a lot of restaurant experience, but somehow altogether we turned this into we got a lot of press out of it. Let's put it that way. It wasn't long lasting for me, because I was very ambitious at the time and on to the next thing. And I was trying to open up what eventually would become L'impero restaurant. And we got to that in 2002. Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
But that,
A long time
well,
ago,
you
man.
say you're being very generous, and this is nothing against your old partners at City Eatery, but the reason the restaurant worked was your food. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't remember anything else. No offense to anyone who worked there. I don't remember who the host was. I don't remember who the manager was. I just remember bringing, well, it's funny because you and I were talking just now before we started recording about, we're recording here 2 days after we lost our mutual friend Tom Valenti. But I had a habit of bringing Italian American chefs to that restaurant specifically for your spaghetti with braised octopus. But I brought Tom Valenti in, I brought Alfred Portali in. Um, I mean, I was so smitten with your food from the
Thank you.
first minute I had it. But that
Well,
place put you on the map, no?
it did. Well, to a certain extent, it did. I had left Chianti, which Ruth Reichel had given us a glowing review at Chianti in 1998, and then you know, it was time to go. I was really looking to open up Limpado, and that was taking longer than I had thought. And so I got this kind of gig at City Eatery, and that's Phil Baltz. I think you were a good friend of still a good friend of Phil Baltz. Like I
Phil
know.
was a witness at my wedding.
So Phil was repping us at the time, and funny enough, now Phil is actually repping us at Martone Street these days. So it's kind of this full circle experience that I love working with old friends at this point. So
Yeah.
that restaurant was kind of a launching pad for a lot of other things that I ended up doing. I'll never forget our review in the New York Times. Uh, it was William Grimes had reviewed us. And like this is all coming back to me now as we're starting to talk about it. And it's funny because Marcus brings that up a lot because
Samuelson.
Alfred Portale, so yeah, Marcus Samuelson, sorry. Marcus Samuelson brings it up a lot because Alfred Portale called him after you had taken him to dinner and said, I don't know where this kid came from, but I'm just eating his food and his spaghetti. There was the spaghetti tomato basil, which eventually, kind of became this, I, with all humility, I say this iconic New York dish. That spaghetti tomato basil that's where Alfred had tasted it for the first time, and he called Marcus to kind of complain about like, who is this kid and why is it so good?
Well, he complained about
Yeah.
it being so good.
Yeah, it was too good. He was kind of pissed him off. I think he got
Well,
upset.
that dish, you won't remember this, but it annoys Caitlin tremendously. I have a really good memory. But
Yeah.
I first had that dish because I came to interview you. You gave a story to a book I did called Don't Try This at Home. And
That I
when I
remember
came to
that.
interview you at Limpero, we sat in a little table right near the front door, and you said, I want you to taste something. Somehow I never had it at City Eatery. And you
Yeah.
brought me the spaghetti with tomato and basil, and I was freaking out. And I think I'm remembering right. There's not much more in it than spaghetti, tomato, and basil, right?
A little bit of butter, Parmesan cheese. There's an infused oil that goes inside, and
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 that's
uh,
it.
and that's how I made it.
Yeah, so that's why I think it was so beguiling to somebody like Alfred. It was like, how do you do this with, like 6 or 7 ingredients, including the salt and pepper? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. I remember being mind blown, and you, at least with me, you didn't tell me what was in it until you set me up. I ate it, and I was like, "What's in that?" And then you were like, then you. But anyway,
It,
okay. The
it
dish
really
I
does.
remember,
I love to hear you tell that story because those are memories that I don't recall. Although
I'm sure.
we had a lot of fun conversations over the years, and I remember the story in that book of the eels,
Yeah,
right? The eels that had spilled all over the place. Yeah, very
absolutely.
very
That's
funny.
Don't Try This at Home. Yeah.
Right.
But the dish I remember, and then we'll move on to other things about your life, was the spaghetti with braised octopus that
Yeah.
you did. And by the way, I remember pretty much the first dinner I had there. I had your polenta with mushrooms,
Yeah.
and I had your braised baby goat. And
Yes.
then we had it somewhere in there, we had spaghetti with braised octopus, which I was so fixated on. And I'm sure you won't remember this, but there was a Saturday afternoon. I was going to come to that restaurant and you were going to teach me how to make it.
Is that right? Is that
And then
right?
someone threw you tickets either to a Yankee game or a Mets game. and you called and said, I can't give up these tickets. I got to go.
Yeah, it was definitely the Yankees because what would I do with Mets tickets, honestly?
Well, that's why I didn't take a guess, because I know temperatures run hot around that subject. Okay. So listen,
That's amazing. I love that.
let's talk about what we're here to talk about, and then we'll go wind back and do your origin story. Tell us about these new sauces. I've had, by the way, all four of them. You just mentioned the team at Baltz and Company. They were kind enough to send me some samples. I've eaten my way through the whole case. They're delicious. But
I'll send
first
you
of all,
more.
why don't you explain the name, and then why don't you explain how you decided to, throw your hat into a very crowded arena?
It is a very crowded arena, to say the least, and everybody has opinions about jarred sauce, and that's where we started from. Martone Street is the name of the brand, and Martone Street is the street that my grandparents built a home on when they moved to the U.S. from Italy. I think my mother was 2 years old when they built the home. My mother was born in the U.S. and she was like two when they built it. And it's still there. My mother still lives on Martone Street to this day. And Martone Street is the place, I always say, where I kind of learned about food. I connected with family at the table on Martone Street. And that's, I always say we didn't have a lot, but that's how we showed love. And that's how I was showed love, was through the generosity of food. So it's always a touching story for me because it meant so much. My grandfather had this huge garden, and I could still to this day, when I smell basil, I think of, the amount of basil that he had in that garden was incredible. And so I still think of him to this day. And Martone Street, that signature pomodoro that you were just talking about is actually, now that tomato sauce is in the jar. And we use those same principles. All fresh tomatoes inside the jar. We use an infusion of olive oil, which is with basil, crushed red pepper, and garlic, into olive oil, and then we strain that out and put that olive oil, and that's where the seasoning comes from. It is as simple and straightforward as it can get. And if you look at the ingredients list, what I love is it resonates with a lot of moms because it's a healthy product. No citric acid, no preservatives, gluten-free. There's no chemicals inside there. When you look at that ingredient list, it looks as if you were to come to my house and I were to cook for you. That's what it is. It is delicious, and it makes people really happy. And that's what I wanted. I wanted something where we can take that restaurant experience and give it to people at home with no efforting at all. There's a little QR code on the back also. When you scan that QR code, it takes you to videos and recipes, videos of me cooking these recipes. And I wanted that because everybody asked me, well, what do I do with this sauce? And I don't have to answer now. I just say, scan the QR code. It makes my life
wait a minute. What do you do other than put it on pasta? I can think of things you could do. You could make chicken parm with it. You could use it in other ways, but is it not predominantly just to be tossed with some freshly cooked pasta?
It's predominant, but I would say you don't have to limit it. You don't have to limit it to tomato sauce on pasta. If you use it as an ingredient in other dishes, we have recipes for chicken cacciatore and steak pizzaiolo, stuffed shells. We have all kinds of things, an accompaniment. Bloody Mary mix, that's another thing, like having this fresh tomato as a Bloody Mary mix as well. There's a real differential of what's in this jar compared to what other people do. I have learned so much about the sauce business over the past 4 years. We've been developing this for about 3.5 years. We launched 4 months and 2 days ago at Sprouts stores, all 472 stores. And what a lot of people do, and what a lot of people don't know about the sauce world, is a lot of tomatoes come from Italy, and it's more of a paste or a puree, and then water is added that's seasoned, and then they run it through tubes, and they're heated and cooked inside these tubes, which are then put in the jars. We take a little bit more of a holistic, kind of organic approach, if you will. Like, I look at it the way, in that sense of legacy, the way my grandparents would can and jar tomatoes every year, where they're taking these tomatoes peeled and seeded. We happen to purchase them peeled and seeded, which obviously saves a tremendous amount of time and labor. We purchase them from California. They're shipped to the East Coast. We put them in giant kettles. There's videos of me literally cooking 5,000 pounds of tomatoes at a time. It's seasoned properly. And then with heat and pressure, that's how it's put inside the jar in the same manner that my grandparents would do, when they were jarring tomatoes in their backyard.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone knows this, but in Italian American families, it's like end of summer tradition that you do what you just described. I mean, there's still, I live in Brooklyn. I lived until a few years ago in Carroll Gardens, which is a very still Italian American neighborhood. And I mean, there's still people there making backyard wine and like a lot of those traditions endure today. But that late summer tomato canning, preserving for the winter season is something that's still very alive. In fact, when I lived in the burbs, I'll say, I'll give them a little love on air, but across the street lived Joe and Donna Macaluso, originally from Brooklyn. And I think they did it every Labor Day weekend, but they threw a big canning party and they had a bunch of friends over. Everyone helped do the work. And then they all had a big pasta dinner in their backyard.
I mean, it's in that spirit. That's where Martone Street comes from. Like exactly in that lineage and legacy of that Italian American kind of culture. And I don't care what your background is. You don't have to be Italian American to appreciate that, right? That connection at the table, I think, transcends individuals and really speaks to a majority of people that, again, connecting at the table is something that we've all grown up with to a certain extent. And I don't know anybody who doesn't want more of that, especially when it comes to good food.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting what you're saying about, and I'm sorry I didn't realize it, but about, the other ways to use that sauce, because there are other sauces out there. This isn't a new category you've invented. But there's a distinct thing about, well, yeah, you'd be set forever.
God knows.
No, but there's a quality about your sauce. It reminds me, to the points you've been making, it does remind me of sauces I've had, certainly like in other homes when I lived in Carroll Gardens. How do you describe it? There's a textural thing that I perceive that's just a slight bit unique to this among jarred sauces.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I know exactly what you're talking about. It doesn't have that. So I think when a lot of people taste a jarred sauce, there is that backdrop of flavor. There's a concentrated, and I think it's because of the paste that's used. I also think that the citric acid adds a lot it adds a lot to the palate obviously from an acidic perspective, that when you taste it, it's distinct. And that, frankly, that citric acid bothers me. I don't want that in my sauces. If you were to come to my house and I would cook for you, I wouldn't put citric acid in the food. I don't think that it belongs there. A lot of people have asked me, well, how is it preserved if you don't have citric acid as a preservative? It's preserved through heat and pressure, same way in the spirit of the way my grandparents did it. And so
it's the same way pickles are, right? It's just,
exactly.
it's a vacuum sealed. I don't mean like sous vide, but it's the way the jars are sealed. That's why you hear that pop when you open the jar. Yeah,
exactly. And we still have a 2-year shelf life on these through that as well. And there's there's a little cap on top that it's popped, all the kind of stuff. But I think the lack of tomato paste, and that is a type of sauce, right? That tomato paste, that kind of home style marinara sauce, if you will, that is a distinct style of sauce, which that may be a SKU we do in the future. That may be a variety that we're actually contemplating. But what I want from these sauces are this full extraction of natural tomato flavor, that there's no question that this is a fresh sauce. And when people taste it, and I'll tell people, in meetings with sales people or the buyers from various companies that we're speaking to about carrying this product, and we could speak about that in a moment as well. But what I tell them is taste it out of the jar. I have nothing. Taste it in front of me. You won't. Be critical if you can. And the one thing that we get is people taste it and they're like, "Wow, that is that's a differentiator. That's a different product than what's currently out there. And I think I think great cooking is always a sum of its parts, right? It's the ingredients we use, it's the technique that we give it, it's the nuance of flavor and the layering of those flavors, and when we add what ingredients at which time in order to achieve a really high-end quality product. This lives in the premium space. This is not going to be a $5 jar of tomato sauce. This is, living at between $8 and $9.99 on a shelf because it's a quality product, because we're using the best ingredients.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this all also explains why there are these other contexts you described that you could use it in, right? This explains why it kind of plays well with others.
A lot of times it's an ingredient. It's not the showpiece. And so, I just made Sunday sauce with my mother the other day. And by the way, I needed to get her approval and permission on this thing. I called her my CTO, my chief tasting officer. My mother has an incredible palate. I lined up 30 different jarred sauces for her. And I didn't tell her what was what. We wrote the names on the bottom of these little cups these ceramic cups, not paper cups.
Yeah.
I think there were over 30 sauces that we had in front of her. And there was one that stood out. One. And it turned out to be ours. And she was shocked that she was like, I thought this was a fresh tomato sauce, that it tasted like something that came from the garden. And that's the intention. We want that. We want that freshness. We want to capture the spirit of what was being done on Martone Street, right? Because I think that resonates with everybody that I tell the story to. I can tell you the story of connecting around the table, and that's where I fell in love with food. And I ask you, where's your Martone Street? It will conjure up a memory for you where you fell in love with food at a table with either your family or someone else's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll tell you mine because it's so unique. Because my stepmother was originally from Cuba, my late stepmother, and my family, nobody in my family could cook. I mean, nobody. I think it's one of the reasons I love restaurants and chefs so much. Nobody could cook. But then my father married a woman who was from Cuba, and she could really cook. And her family, she had a huge family. I had a very small collection of blood relatives. I had more Cuban step relatives growing up than I did, blood relatives. Yeah. And I did Christmas Eve with them, and then they would all go to midnight mass after dinner. And we had Thanksgiving with them, which was a combination of American Thanksgiving food. And then, they would work in like rice and beans and yuca, and that would be part of the spread, and that turned me on to food. And also for them, I mean, this is long enough ago, they were all born in Cuba. So these were sort of touchstones for them to the world they had left behind, and not a world like Italy where you can go back and visit, a world that they had permanently left behind. My stepmother never went back to Cuba till the day she died, but there was the food, and there was you've spent time in Miami, the little windows where you can get your Cuban coffee and your pastelito and sit outside, like at a card table. And, that was all stuff that was brought over. So, I have a huge appreciation for that wherever it comes from.
Hey, everybody. Andrew here. I want to encourage you to check out our presenting sponsor, Mies. Not because they're our sponsor, but because Mies exists to make your kitchen life easier. Mies is the chef-created recipe operating system for culinary professionals. What that means is that Mies is a virtual place to house all of your recipes, and just as importantly, it enables you to derive all kinds of information from them: food costs, allergen data, yield loss, unit conversions, and nutritional breakdowns, and also to scale them up or down, and even to cost them, and to do most of that at the press of a virtual button. Mies is also a teaching tool that empowers you to incorporate how-to photos and videos to illustrate individual recipe steps and techniques, which is especially useful and time-saving for multi-unit organizations. The basic version of Mies is free for the entire culinary industry. Upgrade to premium and let Mies make your entire business more efficient and centralized. Train and onboard team members, manage production, and even process invoices. Seriously, if you work with recipes in the pro kitchen or bar, Mies was built for you and will make your entire restaurant's or company's kitchen life easier. And as a listener of Andrew Talks to Chefs, receive 25 free recipe uploads and breakdowns on your new Mies account by signing up today. Learn more at getmeez, that's GETMeez.com/Andrew. Simply click through via the link on the episode description for today's show.
The thing that really gets me excited about Martone Street are these stories. The opportunity that we have to build something that's, I think, a really great, different product in the marketplace that seems to be resonating with people. I've had one person complain about this since we got it. I'm not going to name names. You know who she is. We'll talk about that later. One person say that it's not what they had expected. Everybody else is like, I mean, Andrew, I can't even tell you the people who reach out on social media, who email me directly, who are like, this reminds me of my grandmother, and there's emotions attached. There's a woman who left us a voicemail the other day. She was literally in tears as she was eating this, saying that she felt like she was at a table of angels speaking to her ancestors. Now, a little dramatic, but I mean, how much do I love that? You know what I mean?
Like, of course.
I love that.
You'll take it. Yeah.
I will take it. We are invoking memories and loving memories for people as they taste this product. And honestly, I can't think of anything at this point in my career. I've done a lot. Like we could talk about all of it. I think this is the best thing that I've ever done in my life.
Wow.
Outside of my family. I really do. I think
that's a bold statement.
I think the product in the jar, I think the direction that we can take this in, Sprouts, when we launched with Sprouts, they were so taken by it. After launch, we had a 3-month exclusive with them. They called us a few weeks ago and they said, we want to take this, all our prepackaged goods that we do, spaghetti, all the meatballs, like chicken parm, all the things that they do that are prepackaged, they want to change their in-house tomato sauce to Martone Street now because they love it that much. I don't take that for granted. You know, I am so incredibly honored and flattered that people feel this way about something that's so personal and so closely connected to this kind of evolving career that I've had over the years.
I want to talk a little more about this, but let's talk about it at the end in chronological order because you've never been on before. I want to get a little bit into your backstory. You've talked a little just now about growing up and your family and all that. What I would love to know, because you are right on the brink of when it was okay for a kid to tell their parents they wanted to be a chef and when it wasn't okay to tell parents. You're like right in the middle. Someone who's around your generation, I'm like, it could have gone either way because chefs were getting famous. You could see them on television, but there were still these remnants of like, why do you want to go into a kitchen?
Well,
tell me about, did you ever think you were going to do anything else? Did you have different ambitions as a child? Where did like 12, 14, 15-year-old Scott Conant think his life was going? And if it's the kitchen, that's fine.
No, well, I went to a vocational school for high school. And so my freshman year of high school, we had to make a choice of, what career do you want? What vocation are you choosing? So I had chosen plumbing because they had told us that plumbers started at work at $35,000 a year. And that was $5,000 a year more than every other trade or vocation that they had spoken to us about in high school. And so I was like, well, 35 grand, that's the life for me. That's what I want to do. I guess a lot of people had fallen for that shtick and there were too many people who had applied for the plumbing class. So I didn't get in. My second choice was culinary arts because it was honestly the only thing that just, for some reason, it just came really naturally to me. And I remember the chef instructors in the class saying to me, like, if you want to do this, we will make room for you. Like, we'll make sure that you get into this class. And I was like, I'm going to be a cook. Like, I don't know. Simultaneously, I started working at a family friend's restaurant as a dishwasher. And I will never forget the day I walked into that kitchen. I
Where
was
was this, by the way?
in
Exactly.
Waterbury, Connecticut. Waterbury,
Waterbury, Connecticut.
a place called the Sea Loft. And I remember walking into that kitchen for the first time. It was foreign ground for me. I'd never been in a commercial kitchen. I'd never really seen anything. We didn't go out to eat a lot as a kid. We would eat pizzas on Fridays. My mother was a great cook. There was no reason for us to go, and it's expensive to go out to dinner. We didn't, as I said, I didn't grow up with means. And so that idea of walking into that kitchen and seeing what was going on back there, it was like it was honestly a whole new world for me. And I fell in love with it immediately. And so as I couldn't get into that, into the plumbing class, I chose culinary arts as a second choice. I was like, I think I'm good here. This is kind of amazing. And I remember saying to my mom that week, I don't know where this is going to take me in my life. And I was not an introspective kid at all. I played baseball all the time. I stopped playing baseball and I started working. That was 40 years ago this year. 40 years ago. I can't believe I'm old enough to say that. And there was no looking back for me. My third choice, by the way, was hairdressing. I figured at least I'll be in a group with a bunch of women. Like, thank God.
But how perfect, right? That for you, the culinary arts live between plumbing and hairdressing. I mean, that really speaks to where no, right? This speaks to where the profession sat at that time. It's
Yeah,
kind of
really does.
amazing.
It's I'll never forget my father, not just my mother, first of all, said to me, like, what do you mean you're gonna be a cook? Like, her idea of a chef was Mel Sharples from Alice's Diner. Like, you remember that show, Mel's
The
Diner?
TV show Alice,
The
yeah,
TV
which
show
was
Alice?
based on the movie Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore.
That's right.
Yes.
So that's my mother's idea. It was like, oh my God, I got Mel Sharples as a kid. And my father, like, I remember him like questioning my sexuality. Honestly, it's like, wow, maybe my son's gay. This is like, they were talking about, this is 40 years ago. There's a different mindset towards
Yeah.
chefs. And so the idea of being entrepreneurial didn't show up until much later. I mean, I felt at the time, maybe if I did things right, at the end of my career, I could become an executive chef someplace and maybe have a small piece of a bistro in New York City. Like that was my end goal. Like I thought, I don't know how to pronounce it because I don't speak French. You remember that restaurant called the United States? It's that Uni.
Oh, Les États-Unis, yeah.
You say it much better than I do.
I say it wrong too. But yes, yeah, I remember. I only ate there once, but yeah.
Well, that was my ideal restaurant, like a restaurant like that. And still to this day, I don't think they build restaurants like that anymore. It was heartfelt. It was one of the great restaurants of New York City. It was a real inspiration, that restaurant. That was my long-term goal. I figured maybe I can do that. I was working at 19, I was 15 when this happened. On an externship from CIA. I went to work at San Domenico in New York City under Tony May. And honestly, that was an eye-opening experience as well, because I'd never seen Italian food like that. I was only accustomed to Italian American food that I grew up with. And that was, again, like the type of cuisine that I wanted to do, ambitious, high-end, luxury ingredients. I was learning things on a daily basis. Paul Bertolotto was the chef at the time. Lorenzo Boni, who's now the corporate chef for Barilla US, was a sous chef there. And obviously Tony May, iconic New York restaurateur, rest his soul. It was I felt to a certain extent, I've heard this expression before, like a cork in a stream. I just went with it. And I just continued to take steps that would make me a better cook, make me a better chef, make me learn more in every single venue that I was a part of, surround myself with people who I could learn from constantly. I was at San Domenico for 5 years, and that was a core staple in my cuisine today, and also in my outlook on what great restaurants look like. I was there to trail one night, and I watched Paul Bertolotta cooking this steamed halibut dish, and there was a simplicity to it. It was halibut with zucchini. Did some zucchini flowers, a little guazzetto of a sauce, like a tomato-based little guazzetto, some zucchini inside the dish, zucchini flowers to top it, poached, steamed halibut over the top. And I will never forget him kind of drizzling olive oil over the dish and putting it up in the window. And I thought to myself, that's what I want. That's what I want. And it changed my life. That dish changed my life. Paul, I may have never told him this before. I should probably pick up the phone and call him one day and just be like, I want you to know you changed my life. The chef that when Paul left was a chef named Deo Schoneger, and Deo was from Alto Adige. I went to his mother's home. I used to live in Germany when I got out of school because I figured it'd be easier to get a job in Italy from Germany than from New York. Seemed like it made sense. It didn't work out for me that way. But I went to Deo's mother's house. They had a little kind of Airbnb, and her food was spectacular. Like I'll never forget. She gave me this roasted roebuck with this kind of sauce with a bunch of currants and all these mountain fruits, I would say, berries and things like that inside the sauce, a roasted pear and creamy polenta. And I'll never forget that dish as long as I live. That venison, that roebuck that was on that plate was other level. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, there's a rusticity to this food that I really love. And I feel like that's kind of ingratiates yourself. That rusticity ingratiates. There's almost a vulnerability with that rusticity, right? But there's still a refinement, which also really resonated with me as well, coming from this French background like you're talking about. So I figured there's got to be a way for me to be able to identify that balance of rusticity and elegance, that alta cucina, the cucina povera, and bring that together from an American perspective. And that's how I cook to this day. Yeah.
I think that is so well said. And I think that summarizes a through line of what's happened with Italian food in this country the last 20, 25 years. People applying not necessarily the exact techniques that they learned in their French-focused culinary programs, but like you said, that combination, that sweet spot on the spectrum between rusticity on one end and elegance and refinement on the other end. And I also like that you didn't, it's taken me a couple of years to train it out of my vocabulary, but I've stopped using words like elevated, or because as you know better than I do, those rustic dishes are as delicious as anything you'll ever eat. So just because they don't involve intricate techniques or somebody doesn't know, chiffonade from Baton, from Juliet, it doesn't really matter in terms of how the food eats, but they are different styles.
They're different styles, but I always say that rustic shouldn't mean sloppy. And I think all too often we've seen that over the years also, where it's just kind of thrown on the plate and people are like, well, it's rustic. There's technique is really important, and I'm in a restaurant right now. I have a restaurant in Atlanta called the Americano. And the reason why it's named the Americano is when I was a young cook coming up, that's what all the people in the kitchen would call me, the Americano. Oh, Americano, like not necessarily in a positive way. When I worked in Germany, there was other words that they would call me, but it all boiled down to like, let's have the American guy do it. Or, that's the matter, the Americano, non ti capisce un cazzo, like you don't understand anything, and that's the reason why I have this name, the Americano, is kind of an homage to who that kid was and how today would that kid be proud of the work that I'm doing now. I think I'm living a little bit of a different trajectory than I had earlier anticipated. And I think that's the blessing of life. Like that's the one other thing that I am always open to seeing this kind of unfold in a new and different way. And I never thought I would be in the CPG world, right? I've done television over the past 17 years, and I've kind of shifted from that and really focused on these new these new businesses, and utilizing television and all media at that point as an advertising platform is a business decision, just like it was a business decision to get into television when I started doing it also, just like it was a
Yeah.
business decision to diversify various brands and start to create something. We're working on a casual sandwich concept up until a very high-end restaurant like Layola that we just opened in the Bahamas, and having a CPG component as well, and working on a YouTube channel in order to kind of teach and learn with other people at the same time. So I love the things that I've been able to get into over the past 40 years. And to your point, I was kind of young. I was early into this game. It was just my mother tells a story of going to CIA on my graduation and realizing that there's an entire culture of chefs that we were never exposed to in our world, right? Restaurants were a place that on a special occasion you went to if you were lucky, for more often than not. Like I said, other than pizza on Friday nights, we were eating at home because we just didn't have the means to do it. So, seeing the evolution of the restaurant world, seeing the evolution of chefs in general, like I've been in it. I'm not sure I've been a part of the movement of it, but I've been in it the entire time. Like you can name a dozen chefs who've been part of that evolution over time, from Gordon Ramsay and Bobby Flay, and the list goes on and on of all these chefs who've been pushing that over the past 30 years or so. Emerald, like, I mean, in you're talking about real chefs who've taken a leap into the television world from a media perspective. Real chefs who, Michelin starred. I'll never forget when Bobby got 3 stars at Bolo. Everybody in the New York Times, everybody was shocked that, oh my God, Bobby Flay got 3 stars. Everybody thought him a TV guy, not a real chef. Bobby's a real, like a great chef, So
Yeah. Well, he
it's nice
he wanted people to know that so much that he opened Gato a few years later.
Yeah. Let's not forget,
No, but anytime you
Bobby.
asked anyone on Bobby's team, Bobby, I agree with you. Bobby is a much better chef than a lot of people who get successful on I don't know if people understand that Wolfgang Puck came up in 3 Michelin star restaurants in Europe. Like these people have powers beyond what most people assume because they have become so famous. But anytime you asked, I remember I was going to go judge on Beat Bobby Flay, and I said, "How late do you need me to be there?" And they said, "Well, you'll definitely be out by 4:30 because Bobby works service every night." Like even the person who was calling me about the car service, like he really wanted people to understand that he knew how to cook.
There's a line in, I think it was Pete Wells who reviewed Gato. The line was along the lines of, like Miles Davis with his back to the crowd, Bobby Flay is running that kitchen. And I text him like that line. I mean, this was obviously years ago. And he was like, where did you find, like, he didn't even see the review yet. I had just somehow it popped up, and I read that line. I was like, Jesus, Bobby, like they're calling you Miles Davis, man. Like the Miles Davis of chefs. That is spectacular. Spectacular. No, what's better than that?
Underrated talent. I mean, Mesa Grill was very important. And the other thing is, this sounds a little PC, and I don't mean for it to, but it goes so against the image he had when he was younger, because he was one of, people were like, oh, he's one of the bad boys. He had grown up in New York and hanging out in Hell's Kitchen. And But, Bobby, I don't know that he would use this word. And I should say, I don't even know Bobby, that we know each other. I've interviewed him a few times. We're not like buddies. But he was in terms of how he hired, promoted, and treated women in his kitchens, he was way ahead of the curve. There are a number of women who were sous chefs for him. I've had some of them on this show tell stories of how if anyone gave them like attitude, he would shut it down. He really was on board with trying to find that equilibrium in the industry. I'm sorry, we're getting off your story, but I don't think he's ever gotten credit for that, and it shouldn't be a remarkable thing. But generationally, he was, in terms of attitude towards women in the kitchen, Bobby was way
Yeah,
ahead of his
I
contemporaries.
agree. His core team are still, he surrounds himself with amazing people. Most of them just happen to be women. And
Yeah.
I think that's Bobby's thing. Like he identifies people who are really great at what they do. And I've said this to him before. I just did his podcast a couple weeks ago, and there's a moment at the end where Bobby is the most decisive person that I've ever met. And I that is to be respected. Like he doesn't second guess his decision making. And I think it comes from, the confidence that he clearly carries around with him. And I think that, to close the circle on it all, that confidence is something that I have been inspired by deeply. And I think that decision making, that decisiveness, that ability to say this doesn't work for me, and I know there's something better out there for me, so I'm not going to say yes to this. I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait for my yes. Like that is like, I think all chefs, especially the way we all come up, continue to come up. There's that, I got to take this opportunity in front of me, even though it's not perfect, because I'm not going to get another opportunity. And changing the mindset around that is something that I think all chefs need to learn. And that is a conversation, probably a podcast for another day. But
Well,
I
can I just say
do,
though, I think I could probably calculate more or less when this happened if I go through my texts, because there was a moment in time, I won't be specific because I don't want
yeah,
to give anything away, but there was a moment in time where I wrote you about some transition and you wrote me back, and this is all your text said.
yeah,
I'm getting the wrong people off the bus and the right people on the bus.
yeah, yeah, man. That's in it. Honestly, I would say, Andrew, I'd say for the first time in my career, I got the right people on my bus. And I can't even tell you what that feels like. Like
Yeah.
you don't realize what you don't, what you're missing until you have what you've missed. You know what I mean? It's just like the opposite. You don't realize what you have until it's gone, right? Like in my case, I finally have some incredible individuals in my world. And I've always had great kitchen teams. Don't get me wrong. Like I've been blessed with amazing cooks around me as I was, coming up as a chef. Um, and I can name them. I mean, some of these guys have been with me through various
Sure.
restaurants. When I got out of New York City restaurants and moved on from all that stuff, moved out west, I miss those guys. I miss my core group of teams. But when you're talking about business partnerships and executive leaders and people who are bringing ideas to the table and executing at a high level and thinking about the big picture, I've never had people like that in my world, and I do now. And it is so incredibly inspiring for me on a daily basis. Honestly, I feel like I'm in my mid-30s again because I'm just so excited on a daily basis to wake up and do what we're doing. I
Yeah.
wear a lot of different hats, doing a lot of different things, and that's the blessing of it, that I get to do it. Number one, I get to do it for myself, and I get to do it with people who are incredibly talented at what they do.
Yeah. So you alluded to it in this call. Uh, Limpero was kind of the thing you were headed toward. You got it at the around the same time you had Alto, um, in
Alto,
Midtown.
yeah. So we opened Limpero in 2002, and then 3 years later we opened Alto in
Oh, it
2004.
was 3 years between them?
Two and a half
Oh, I
years.
didn't realize that. Okay. But anyway, you had you had two things going.
Yeah.
That was obviously a huge time in your life. That's your name, that's when really you weren't just this guy that people like me had their eye on. You were kind of known to the public. Um, what do you see as some of the big, after those? What are some of the big, as you see them, um, turning points in your life that kind of spun you in another direction or took you to the next level? I have to think television. I mean, not that that was ever your end game, but I have to think that that was a part of what's enabled some of the stuff you're doing.
Well, 100%. When I left Limpero and Alto and kind of doubled down on myself, that belief in self was always a big thing. Listen, I am a big believer in the individual, right? Like you got to be true to yourself. If something is inspiring you and pushing you forward, and something is in your thoughts or in your heart, I think you have a responsibility as a human being to pursue that. I really do believe that. And granted, I have read The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand 20 times in my life, because that individualism and kind of objective thinking has been really important to me. I realize that doesn't resonate with everybody, but that is my North Star, so to speak. And so that being said, pushing myself overly ambitious, and I always say I'm ambitious to a fault, starting Scarpetta and this idea of savoring food down to its very last taste, and using that as that ending goal of a Scarpetta as the beginning point of a dish. Like, that was something I really wanted to pursue. And so when I started Scarpetta, I just happened to get a phone call 6 months after Scarpetta opened to do a TV show on the Food Network. And I had turned down a really big opportunity on a different network years ago, maybe 2 years prior to getting that phone call from Food Network. And I had put myself in a situation that I couldn't do it because of the business partnerships. And so I wanted to be able to do whatever I wanted to do. I didn't want to be encumbered by someone else's expectations of what my role should be. And so in the spirit of that individualism, I started Scarpetta, and I also took an opportunity, it was like, come judge this food on this show and Ted Allen is the host. It's called Chopped. And we started shooting that in 2008, and it aired in 2009. And 17 years later, we're still doing the show. It's 18 years now. And that has been a differentiator. And the reason why I did it was simple. I had no intention of television, wasn't important to me, but I had signed a deal to do a Scarpetta in New York City, and then one in Miami and another one in Las Vegas. And I needed an advertising platform, quite frankly. I knew that outside of New York City, I was an unknown entity. And so what better advertising platform is there than television at the time? Now that has changed today. And I think, we could talk about other platforms that make a lot more sense. But at the time, that was the step that I needed, I felt, in order to give relevance to the weight of my judging on these shows. And I became known as someone who was a little bit harsh, and maybe uncharacteristic of people who know me. Even my mother called me one day and said, "You're so mean on that show." And for me, it was really about, I want people to be able to come into my restaurant and think that I'm not nice and judge my food the same way, and walk out and say, okay, now I understand why he's the way he is. Because I believed in what we were doing at Scarpetta so much.
Yeah.
And that just kind of like, suddenly we're doing, we signed the deal and opened up Miami, and then we signed LA and Toronto and Las Vegas. And, in that 2.5-year period, I was on the road the entire time, opening up dynamic restaurants in dynamic buildings. I mean, the Fontainebleau and the Cosmopolitan and the Montage, they were amazing opportunities, and all based out of, you'd been to Scarpetta, this little tiny 90-seat restaurant on the edge of the meatpacking district on 14th.
Yeah, that was at what, 14th and 8th or 9th?
14th and 9th. Yeah.
And 9th. Yeah, on the northeast corner. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it was delicious. Yeah.
Great. And it worked. And it was another moment where I think, you don't often get the opportunity to capture lightning in the bottle in New York City. And I'm not a guy who spends time looking backwards, but I did it, and I did it twice, and we did it as a team. And I honestly, I think it means more to me now than it meant at the time, because I was just all over the place and spread out and just literally killing myself to make those restaurants go. And they were fantastic. They were fantastic.
So this is kind of a frivolous question, but since Chopped has come up, how much do you guys all hang out? I mean, you guys, like, you're always on, not as much maybe in the last couple of years, maybe COVID put a dent in it, but I mean, there was a period of time where every time I went on Instagram, you guys were like the Avengers, you know, like you all had your own businesses, but you would all like come together, you know, but you were always out at restaurants. I saw half of you. I don't think you were there, but there was one day I went to have lunch at the old location of Barbudo, and
Yeah.
like half of the judges were at another table. I guess they
Yeah.
must have just filmed in the neighborhood. But are you guys all real? Are you guys like a little club?
Super close. I mean,
Yeah.
Marcus Samuelson and I are always hanging out. We have restaurants in Baja Mar, in the Bahamas, and so we see each other all the time. Marcus and I are. It's funny how at this point of our lives, our careers have come together so much, and so we just did a show together a couple of years ago called House of Knives. And so, Marcus and I in particular, Mark Murphy and I are super close. Like Amanda and I were just texting yesterday, Jeffrey Zakarian. And you got to remember, most of us have been friends prior to that show as well. Alex Guarnaschelli and I had known each other for 15 years prior to that show coming on. So, there's a blessing there. I feel like, you say the Avengers. I always call us like the friends, the show Friends of the culinary world to a certain extent. Because we've just, Aaron Sanchez is still one of my closest friends in the world. So, the list goes on and on. We all hang out all the time. We always talk. We always, Chris Santos is always trying to put us together whenever he's on the East Coast. Like, who else is here? Let's go to one of my restaurants or meet at somebody else's restaurants and just have dinner and enjoy ourselves. I mean, we are forever tied, for better or worse. We are forever tied together. I have a picture in my office of all of us because we're so rarely together these days, and it just speaks to. I'm going to send you a copy of the photo so you know what I'm talking about. It's good to know that throughout this crazy business, there's still a core group of friends that we can all get together and rely upon and get advice from and give advice, or, I'm doing this event. I would love for you to come in and whatever the case may be. It really is a blessing, truly.
A quick note of thanks to one of our promotional partners, S.Pellegrino Sparkling Natural Mineral Water. For the past 125 years, S.Pellegrino has supported the art of fine dining in all of its ever-changing forms and nurtured the next generation of chefs through resources and mentorship. To learn more, visit sanpellegrino.com.
You spoke a few minutes ago about developing the confidence to let certain opportunities go by if they just, if it's not the right one, and that is very hard for young people. And I've always seen a similarity between singer-songwriters, right, rock bands, and chefs. The reason for the similarity, in my opinion, is these are things you cannot do. I mean, yeah, you can cook at home. Yeah, you could jam in your garage. But any real success depends on other people consuming what you're offering, right? However you use the word consuming. And so I think that's why historically so many songwriters and bands have made terrible deals, right? Because somebody wanted to give them a record contract. Well, you need that. But sometimes they sign their life away, I think Billy Joel did it like 3 times.
Jimi Hendrix, and his estate didn't settle that contract dispute. First of all, he passed away with like $12,000 in the bank, right? This is Jimi Hendrix. You know what I mean? You read his life story, and Billy Joel. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's hundreds of artists that have signed bad deals, and I am. Yeah, I can't speak to details, but I have signed a bad deal or two.
But here's my question. So you talked about that in the context of restaurants, right? What about television or whatever is being offered to people these days? Partnerships, promotional partnerships. I think it's a similar mindset. Oh, this is the thing that could take me from being known by this much people to like the circle widening out nationally, maybe globally, right? But there are downsides to some of that. We have a lot of young cooks who listen to this show. I assume you would give similar advice around that not every opportunity to get on camera is necessarily a good thing.
These days it's different than it was. It was different than it was 5 years ago, if you think about it, right? There's so many young cooks and chefs who are making a great living by, just utilizing social media, YouTube, Instagram, any meta platform, TikTok, all that kind of stuff. There's money to be made there. Money has never been my motivator. I want to be clear about that. Like I think money is a byproduct of work done well. And that may be a little bit of an old school thinking. I was just listening to this amazing podcast called Founders. I don't have details on it, but it's a great podcast. And it was talking about Dyson, that company. I don't remember the founder's name. I know his last name is Dyson. Anyway, the quote that really took away is there is no quantum leap to success. Success is a slow burn until it isn't. And 20 years of doing it, then all of a sudden you're successful seemingly overnight. And I remember having a conversation at L'Impetto with Frank Bruni, where he was like, nobody's really known you. Now all of a sudden you're this like hotshot New York City chef. I said, I've been doing this for 20 years already. There's no, suddenly after 20 years, I'm an overnight success, right? Like you hear that story a lot. I think it boils down to one thing. Forget about the money, forget about everything. What excites you? What makes you most happy? Just do that without any inkling of where it's going to bring you. Do the things that make you happiest, that bring you joy, that light you up, that you feel like I get this thing where when it's something that I really love, I get the chills and I'm like, this means it's right for me. I'm a deeply spiritual individual. So, I try to keep these in the name of spirit and in all that is, like, I try to stay very in touch with that stuff and aligned accordingly. And that's why I pursue the things that I pursue. If it doesn't light me up energetically, if it doesn't get me excited, I'm probably not going to give it 100% if it doesn't light me up. So I don't do it. I shouldn't do it. It's going to take away from the things that do light me up. And at the end of the day, I mean, listen, you talk about that restaurant, City Eatery, in that restaurant, I didn't get paid for 4 months. I got an eviction notice from my landlord at the time, and my roommate was like, I give you money for rent every month, Scott. Like, what's going on? I would take that money and pay my staff every single month. And then after 4 months, obviously we didn't pay the rent. Something's going on. I gotta pay the rent. I eventually got to get paid. I bring that up because the only thing I wanted to do was cook great food. And so that was my focus. And anything that got in the way of cooking great food or making myself a better chef or identifying great ingredients and spending time with guests, shaking hands and all that stuff, everything was secondary to that, including paying my bills, which was irresponsible, but it was indicative of what's worked best for me over time. And that singular kind of focus of just doing what I absolutely love. That's what you should do. That's what you should do.
You know what's funny? There's a documentary, I don't know if it's still there, but it was on Criterion Channel recently. And it's the documentary is called Goodbye Horses. And it's named for a song, Goodbye Horses, which was a song that Jonathan Demme used in 2 movies. He used it in Silence of the Lambs, and he used it in Married to the Mob, I think. But it's the only song of really any note that this artist, Q Lazarus, had. Q Lazarus was this woman from the New York area and had a very up and down career in New York and London. But there's a line in the doc that I think about it at least every other day since I saw the doc. And I'm not in my 20s anymore, but sometimes I still have this feeling. And what she said was, I was living in New York City going after a dream. And she said, those aren't all good days, but there's no feeling like that in the world.
Yeah.
And it's true. And she was driving a cab when she got discovered. She was
That's
driving a
amazing.
cab and had her own music on, and Jonathan Demme was in the back of the cab, and that's how he ended up using her stuff. But that line, you don't always have when you're going after a dream, you have good days and really bad days, but there's no feeling like it in the world. And I think anyone who's ever, not to be a New York booster, but especially a place like New York, or if you're a young actor or director, probably LA feels like this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm here because there's something I want to go after. Most people don't get it, and I'm going to take that chance, you
Yeah.
know? And that is an amazing thing to do.
And when it starts to come to fruition, I will never forget. I was at Chianti in 1998. I got my first write up in the New York Times. It was a Diner's Journal by Ruth Reichel. And it was the first time in my life that I felt like I wasn't crazy for pursuing this, whatever I was pursuing, like whatever it was that I was trying to do. I'm not sure I could even articulate it today.
Yeah.
I felt like I wasn't crazy. And I remember it was Geraldine Delaney was my PR person at the time. You remember Geraldine? Who
Oh, I was
eventually,
good friends with Geraldine. Yeah.
Geraldine's
I think she's
amazing.
in Texas. I think she's in Texas now.
I think she's in Texas now. And she's the person who introduced me to Ed Schoenfeld, uh, to close that circle. Um, and and Geraldine was like, look what we got you in this tiny little restaurant on 55th and 2nd Avenue, this restaurant called Chianti. I mean, that was another one of those. I remember walking up 2nd Avenue, reading this paper and thinking to myself, like, oh my God, it was like Sally Field when she won the Oscar, right? Like, you like me, like I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy for cooking this way. And, to your earlier point, like there weren't, other than San Domenico in New York City, and Baba, who had opened in 98 as well, nobody was really cooking food that was elevated, to use that word, that was higher end Italian food. Palio was another big kind of instrumental restaurant in New York City. I don't know if you remember this. It was the
Yeah,
second,
yeah,
across from Le Bernardin, right up the stairs there. So Tony May had opened up that restaurant also. Yeah. I mean, these were like I love this trip down memory lane of thinking about those restaurants, because a lot of these restaurants just don't exist like they used to anymore, Or
yeah.
they're
Well,
it's just
it's
different.
I always say this, when you look back, and I'm sure younger people who are listening, you know, it, especially with restaurants and food, things that seemed like big steps forward at the time seem quaint today. It doesn't seem, like Drew Nieperant's always talking about how, before Montrachet, it was the Les La restaurants, meaning the French restaurants. And, when when the Wall Talks opened Chanterelle, they didn't call it Les Chanterelle. And that was like a statement, right? Now, today people look at that and they're like, who gives a shit? And it's the same with a lot of the food. It's like, okay, so you made your Italian food a little fancier, but at the time, people are so locked in on food tradition
Yeah.
that these little tweaks that people do, and I would include tweaks to hospitality style,
Oh,
Arjav and Tracy, the couple that have Birdies in Austin, Texas, who have gotten tons of press, rightfully so, and it's an amazing restaurant, but their service model is you order at the podium on your way in. It's the way you would order it, like, at certain fast casual places, but the food is like, Union Square hospitality level food, right? In 40, 50 years, people are going to look at that and go, what was the big deal? But in the moment, it's a big deal
big deal, because it's such a
because you're
departure from what
breaking.
you know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like when you see a movie where a character walks off the screen, or it's like it just breaks the reality and and changes it.
Uh-huh.
And it's just, we're so used to restaurants and food behaving a certain way that when somebody just tweaks it, it seems like I was just saying to someone recently, do you remember like 10, 12 years ago, the first time you went to, a nice restaurant and the silverware was just in a canister on the table or in a little drawer like at Wild Air, that was a noteworthy thing when it first happened. Now you don't even think of it. It doesn't even register, right? But when you went to the first place that did that, you were like, oh, that's cool, and now it's just the way it is.
Like, how come we haven't done this before? Yeah.
Yeah. Or this is kind of neat. Or oh yeah, why do they have to remark my place between every course? Like
I got a question for you. You've been doing what you do for a really long time, specifically speaking to chefs and legendary chefs and chefs that are just coming up today. I will tell you, and I think I've told you this before, one of the most inspirational books I've ever read was your book, Chefs, Drugs, and Rock and Roll. Like, I
thank you
just
very much.
think that book is spectacular because it really just created this amazing foundation. All their chefs were creating foundations for what we've seen today. And there's a documentary that I always related to, that Bob Dylan's son, I think it was Jacob Dylan, had done.
Oh, I saw that.
Did you see it?
About the Laurel Canyon scene?
The Laurel Canyon thing. Of
Yeah,
course,
I saw that. Yeah, Jacob Dylan
something
did
in the
that. Yeah.
valley. Like,
Yeah.
and I always think, like, I've said this to you before, but I always think that there should be a documentary about Chef's Drug and Rock and Roll in the spirit of that documentary, because I just there's just so much of a story to tell, right? But my question is, like, what have you found in all the conversations that you've had with successful chefs over the years? What's the through line with all of them? Like, what's the common theme that you've seen across the board with so many of these people that you've talked to over the years?
First of all, thanks for the kind words about the book. It's almost become a documentary 3 different times, and it keeps getting derailed. I'm trying. I desperately would love it to happen. But what I used to say, although I think it depends how you define success, right? Because like you said, things are so different now. Like, I don't know that a young person who's deciding to become a chef necessarily thinks having a successful restaurant or restaurants is their personal end game. I think some of them want to have like all the stuff that comes, all the things that for you are like extracurricular business activities. That, I think, for a lot of young people is what success is now, right? And that's fine. I always say this whenever I hear an older friend, being a curmudgeon about stuff. I always say things change. It is the nature of things to change. You can't get upset about it. You're not going to change. You're not going to stop it. So I just say that as an objective fact. Things are different. What I used to say to that question was, it kind of underscores a lot of what you said in this conversation, because I remember once I interviewed a guy named Andy Forsheimer, who became a very successful restaurateur. He used to be an owner of Bar Taco, which is kind of a small collection of restaurants, and he was involved in I think a Spanish tapas concept. He had worked at Stars for Jeremiah back in the day, and some other big names. And we did an interview at a coffee place, and we stepped out onto 23rd Street, and he said, "Is there a theme to your book?" And I said, "Well, I hope it's not preachy, but yeah." And he said, "What is it?" And I said, "Why did you start cooking?" And he said, "Because I love to cook." And I said, "That's the theme of the book." You know? And to me, if you asked me that question 20 years ago, I unequivocally would have said that's what all these people have in common. Because if you go back to that era that you're talking about, which was the 70s and 80s, those people didn't, the idea that you could make all this money and have, those things didn't exist for chefs. You couldn't, it wasn't even until after Wolfgang that you necessarily started to think about chefs having a restaurant empire. That was not a thing. You had, when people talk about the old days of Blue Ribbon, where all the cooks and chefs used to go after service and hang out till 4 a.m, all the people who were there had just come from their one restaurant. And I'm including Danielle, Jean-Georges, all these people had one restaurant. And again, I don't say that critically, but that's just the way it was. I mean, today, I do think, I think it depends how you define success. Is that fair? I don't know. I mean, because we've all seen this, right? Like you, listen, if you have the right personality and you're savvy in the way that you're savvy, Scott, like if I was a 22 2-year-old Scott Conant today, I might not have to be as talented a chef as you are. You know, like we've all seen people who go, there's people who've gone on Top Chef and they don't even make the final 5 contestants, but they have a shtick and they have a look, you know, and they get famous. And I've always say this, I feel like the equation in some cases has flipped. So it used to be, you got like a 4-star review in the New York Times, or you had the most successful restaurant in LA, or maybe somebody like Ruth was championing you. And then you got on television. And the reason you got on television was because you were a celebrated chef in a restaurant. Now we've actually seen several cases of this where someone's really good on television and then they get the restaurant deal, right? Like that's not that unusual now. And I don't say it critically, but it's just hard for me to answer that question across like a 60-year time frame, because I don't think it's the same answer.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Fair?
Yeah, no, it's completely fair. It's interesting to me because, you know, we all have, you know, there's different mindsets coming into this. And I would say up until, again, a few years ago, it would be mindset that, you know, this over ambition, constantly pushing yourself, but it's not the case anymore. And you're right. Like, I think success, it's always been, you know, what's your version, what's your idea of success? What does that mean for you? I think everybody's different. You know, I think, you know, for a lot of people, and me included, you know, being able to take a Tuesday afternoon and lay at the pool for a couple hours, like, whereas I used to be in a restaurant all this time working, you know, 80 to 100 hours a week. Like this is success for me. I can get a tan today. You know what I mean? Like,
God, I say to people, and it's like, it is half a joke, but it's not entirely a joke, because I did once have an office. You've alluded to it in this call. I used to work at a PR firm. But you know, people have said to me, why'd you want to be a writer? And I said, because it's the only job where I can play tennis at 11 a.m. You know, like, and nobody knows, you know, or cares, because I can do the work later. I can do the work at 1 a.m. You know, and that's kind of a joke, but there is some truth in that.
no, that is, you know, it's about life and lifestyle, and you know, what do you want to do? There's just, I do think the one common theme is like you were saying it a little bit earlier, is that this hope that we pursue. Like there's this little thing, this little idea that we're pursuing. It's the hope within that we're trying to catch up to and work towards. And I think when you stop giving yourself opportunities to pursue, I think that's when you start to get old. I think that's when you start to realize you're on the other side of it. And I am not ready to be in that place yet. I feel like, and this sounds so cliche for a guy in his mid-50s, but I feel like I'm just getting started. I'm so excited about the things that I pursue on a daily basis with the people that I get to pursue them with.
Scott, the way you're talking right now is the way I talk with my wife all the time at home. Like I'm also in my mid-50s. I still feel like my career is on the upward trajectory. You know, I can still cover a tennis court pretty well. I still stay out late at night. You know, my life is not substantially different than it was when I was in my 30s, work or play, you know, and I think that's really important. And I also think, like you said, they're, you know, taking on new things. And I also, you know, to me, like Ruth Reichel is like a role model. You know, this is someone who doesn't need to be working. You know, Ruth has a house up in upstate New York and an apartment on the Upper West Side, and she's done all kinds of amazing things. But every time you look up, it's like, oh, she has a podcast. Oh, she produced a documentary. Oh, she decided to do a novel. Oh, you know what I mean? And she still makes the scene, and she still goes to conferences, and I'm like, yeah, why not? That's what I want.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to have that. I don't want to, I mean, I like what I do. Why would I stop doing it? Maybe I'll do less, you know? But one other thing I would say about well, 2 things. One is, to your point about getting old, I had the privilege to interview Rich Melman, the head of the Let Us Entertain You group in Chicago, on the 50th anniversary of that group 5 years ago. And at the time, I think Rich was 81, and he could tell you about every little micro trend that was going on all over the country, right? And I said to him, I'm really struck at how open you are to new things in this industry you've been in for half a century. I said, it's my belief that when you stop, it's that things change thing. When you start screaming at the change, I'm like, you're on your way to being old. And
Yeah.
he said, I totally agree. And he was 81 when he said that to me.
Yeah, amazing.
But I think there's a lot of truth in that. I just think as soon as you like declare yourself outside the current timeline, you're on your way to like being obsolete. Like it's just silly. I'll tell you off air. There's another funny story. But but the other thing I was going to say to your thing about success is I do think chefs who, if you are going to have a restaurant, you cannot phone in a restaurant. That is something I think a lot of people don't understand. It cannot just be this thing you have to have as part of your portfolio to have all the other stuff, because word gets out fast if your restaurant sucks. You can't just open a place by the numbers, abandon it, not have like a partner or a GM or somebody who can man the ship. You cannot do that. I think that is a big mistake I see a lot of people make. And it's also insulting. A meal out costs a lot these days. If you're running a crappy restaurant, and there are people who do it right. Kwame has gone as Hollywood as anybody I can think of, and his restaurant was like, I don't know if it's the #1 restaurant in New York, but it was rated #1. It's certainly a well-respected. He is doing that balancing act correctly, and he's not over leveraging himself with a ton of restaurants. You can have both. But you can't insult your fans by charging them, $100+ a head and giving them a terrible experience. I think that is something, and I don't know if people get that.
I agree with you 100%. And I always have these moments of, if I were to do it over again, what would I change? And I think there's, you can never put the toothpaste back in the tube, obviously, as the saying goes, but you can learn a lot from your own mistakes. And I have made a lot of mistakes, and fortunately, I feel like I've created a great foundation that a lot of those mistakes have been forgiven over time, because we're just constantly in pursuit of excellence. There's a great Bob Dylan quote that I always use: to be in a constant state of becoming, which I just kind of love that, and it speaks to me a lot. I'm such a huge Dylan fan, and it speaks to me because it does give me that hope. It gives me that thing to work on all the time. Like, how am I better? How am I evolving? What's next for me? What's next for the team? How do we continue staying kind of relevant again after 40 years of doing this? It's wild.
All right. Well, on that profound note, I don't even know how long have we been? Oh yeah, God, I've talked your ear off, Scott. We've been going for over an hour.
We got to have lunch one of these days. So
well, that's it. That ball's in your court. You don't live in New York anymore, but when you're here, I would love to see you.
Yeah, it'd be great.
All right. Well, Scott, thank you for coming on at long last. This has been great, and keep going with those sauces. They're good stuff.
Thank you. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for having me on.
And that is our show for today. Again, my great thanks to Scott Conant for joining us. Go check out his restaurants, his pasta sauce, his television show. Links to all of that in the description for today's show. Please go check out Mies, the recipe operating system for culinary professionals, at getmies.com/Andrew. And our thanks, as always, to S.Pellegrino for their longstanding support of the pod. Andrew Talks to Chefs is the property and a production of Table 12 Productions Incorporated. If you'd like to support us, we ask that you do that by telling a friend about the show, posting about the show on social media, and or rating and or reviewing us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you are now watching us on YouTube, please be sure to like and subscribe. Our thanks, as always, to After School Special for our music. Please check out their album Double Barrel Single Entendre on iTunes. Please follow us on Instagram and also on TikTok. @Chef Podcast is the handle on both platforms. Thank you for listening, and we will be back soon with another episode of Andrew Talks to Chefs.